Good evening, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to be with us this evening. I'm Allison Scobberg. I'm here. I am a volunteer group leader for ADDA-SR. We're actually in Sugar Land. We used to meet live in person the last Tuesday of every month, and we've been meeting by Zoom ever since COVID. And ADDA-SR, the Attention Deficit Disorder Association Southern Region, has been around since 1987. It was founded by Pam Esser. She is on this evening, and we are glad that she's here with us. Tonight's webinar is being recorded, and everybody that is registered is going to get a copy of the slides as well as a link to the recording, so you don't have to take notes on every single thing, and if there's any links in her presentation, you're going to get those as well. Following this meeting, probably tomorrow, you'll get that email with the slides. You'll also get an invitation that you can join ADDA-SR. I believe it's $40 a year. It's a great organization to join. You don't have to join that to attend these webinars, but they have several conferences and a lot of training and other meetings that you can attend. And I'm going to be putting in the chat box, there is an upcoming meeting this weekend. It is a virtual meeting. This is Balanced Happy Relationships with Ari. I'm blanking on his last name. Pam put his last name. I think Ari Hickman. So there's a virtual training on that on Balanced Happy Relationships, and I'm putting a link in the chat box for you guys. You can register for that. That's on Saturday from 9 to 11. So I just wanted to let everybody know that. So the other thing that I wanted to mention is we are back here today with Brandi Timmons. Some of you may have had the pleasure of hearing her speak in the past, and we're definitely glad to have her back. And we're especially happy that she's here tonight because she's not feeling as great as she would like to feel, but we're virtual, so she's going to make this happen, and she's going to keep her camera on as long as possible. If she starts feeling bad, she may turn her camera off. I just wanted to give a heads up on that. We invite you, we're going to be monitoring the chat box tonight. We do invite you to put your questions in the chat box. We're going to get to as many questions as we can during tonight's presentation. And also, just for planning purposes, two things. We're in webinar mode, which means that we can't see you or hear you, but we do know you're there, and we're glad that you're here tonight. And I had one other. It escapes me. Anyway, put your questions in the chat box. We'll get to those. And thanks again for being here. Oh, yes. My last thing is we're just going for an hour. So if you're planning your evening, we will be done by 7:30 this evening. So thanks so much, Brandi, for being here with us. And so we are talking about independence being a process. So tell us a little bit more about you.
Thank you, Allison. Thank you for having me back. So who I am and what do I do? I am a BCBA now. I started out as a special education teacher and taught in public schools for almost 20 years, focused on life skills classrooms, working with all age groups, all disabilities, but my favorite has always been middle school and high school. So when I started about 25 years ago, I fell in love with those kiddos who were on the autism spectrum and did not have cognitive disabilities and had so much potential to leave schools and get a job and go to work and do some really amazing things. But what I found in the school system was those were the kiddos that were getting left behind. Those were the kids that weren't getting a lot of services in schools and needed some help to be successful after they graduated. And so that kind of became my passion. I've worked a lot in the transition field over the years and helping individuals learn how to transition out of high school into the workplace. Hence our presentation tonight. So independence is a process. So we're going to start out with what is independence? What does that mean? What does the word mean? So independence is going to be a different idea, and it's going to look different for everyone. It's going to look different for every individual. And as a parent, as a caregiver, wanting you to recognize that wherever your child is at, you're striving for some level of independence. There's always room for growth in that area. So we're not just talking about kids that are going to be moving out of home and living on their own by themselves at some point. This is all kids. And we'll talk some more about some of those important skills later. So for the last, well, let's look at this slide a little bit closer before we move on. So these are some quotes that I pulled just from various places and have had kids tell me over the years, what does independence mean to them? But if you look at kind of a common theme, it's having individual autonomy, the opportunity to be actively involved in decision-making processes, living based on one's own goals, asserting control over your own life choices, the ability to live independently and productively in the community with the same freedom of choice, and freedom from the control, support, aid, or assistance of others. So there's kind of a theme there. Everyone's stating that they want to be able to make choices for themselves. They want to be able to make some decisions about what they're going to be doing and what that looks like. So keep that in mind. That's kind of the first principle of independence for all of our kids, is us being there as a support system to help them to achieve what their goals may be. And so it's really important for us to, as much as possible, include our kids in decision making, include our kids in IP meetings, include our kids in all of the family meetings that you may have about what their future and what their level of ultimate level of independence is going to look like. And I'm sorry, guys, if I'm stumbling over my words a little bit. My brain's a little foggy tonight. Okay, so if we take a look at the next slide, my background for the last few years, I moved to Houston about 6 years ago, and I came here to be a clinical supervisor, BCBA, and realized that I hated it and went back to the school system. But I went back to HISD and became with Houston ISD. And I was actually the only BCBA for the district, 287 schools for a year. Learned a lot about myself, learned a lot about the programs that were there for our kids, saw a lot of things, and saw a lot of changes that needed to be made. After I left there, I became the education director for a nonprofit here in Houston called Social Motion Skills. Social Motion was my dream job. So what we did, we were actually an after-school social skills program and transition program for individuals of all different types of neurodevelopmental disabilities. So we were working with kids of all ages to help them to be prepared for adulthood ultimately, and moving into careers in college and different levels of independence. So because of that, we had a lifespan program, and we served kids ages 4 to 54. And what I learned from that is a lot about what the end goal looks like. And we learned a lot about what the barriers were to the success that these individuals were striving to achieve. And so I've seen that. I've seen the end goal. I've seen where these young adults end up when they're 24, 25, 30 years old. And I've seen the struggles that they've had trying to reach the levels of success that they were hoping to achieve as adults. And that's what we're going to look at today. We're going to look at what are some of those barriers, and how can you, as parents, as caregivers, if we have any therapists or teachers, educators here tonight, what are some of those really key things that you can be looking at for these kids and helping them to prepare for and overcome as they grow and learn? So the first thing, and probably the most important piece of this whole presentation tonight, I want everybody to understand that despite the fact that transition age in Texas and I think federally is age 14 to 16, despite the fact that most schools are not going to start involving your child in any type of independence and transition work until they turn at least 14, it is never too early to start building independence. And as a matter of fact, it's probably the most crucial piece that as a parent and caregiver and educator that you can learn is that we have to start building on these pieces and helping them to overcome these barriers as soon as possible. Lots of our kids need a lot more practice than some of their typical peers. A lot of our kids need to be able to work on skills more frequently and for a longer period of time until they reach a place that those skills are natural for them. So one of the disservices that I feel like school districts have done for our families is that in our IEPs, we do everything, and our goal is always to master a skill. That's not a bad thing. Of course, we want them to master skills, but there's a level farther than mastery. Um, Not quite there yet. Still on the slide we were on. Yeah. So when you master a skill, you're looking at, can you do that skill 9 out of 10 times? Can you do that? You're setting a criteria for the skills. And a lot of times on IEP goals, we may see that we may set the goal for 4 out of 5 times or 70%, different things like that. But what you really want, if you think about you as just an individual, if I go wash a load of clothes and fold them and put them away, I don't have to think about what I'm doing. I don't have to stop and think about it. I've done that so many times, and you as parents understand that for sure. You've done that so many times that it's not something that you have to stop and think about. It's just something that you do naturally. Your mind's muscle memory, your body's muscle memory just does that skill. It's what's called fluency. And we think of fluency in school, you may hear reading fluency or sometimes math skill fluency, but we don't hear fluency with all those other life skills that are so important for our kids to be able to do. Managing our budget, finances, those types of skills. We teach them in isolation. We want them to master a skill, but we don't go any farther than that. So the earlier that you start working on some of the things that they need to know, the longer you have to continue practicing those, the more trials they get over their lifespan, and the more likely they are to get to a place where those life skills and adaptive skills are learned to fluency, where it doesn't take them a lot of thought to be able to do those things. They're no longer a challenge for them, but they just happen as part of their everyday schedules. And so then we can start focusing more on the executive function side of keeping a schedule every week. It's no longer the challenge of the tasks that are within the schedule. All right. So let's move on and take a look at the first barrier to our kids becoming more independent. This particular barrier is what we call prompt dependence. So prompt dependence can be defined as when an individual won't do what they know to do and or they are capable of doing until they are prompted. So this is something that we see frequently with our kids, especially in a special education program. And I know a lot of the kids that we're talking about today may not be in a special education program. They may be in a 504 have a 504 plan. They may be just receiving some accommodations. But it's a principle that we as the educators of these individuals need to keep in mind. When there's nothing wrong with providing prompts to someone, because a lot of times when you're learning something, you have to have that help and that support to learn a skill. I happen to be an equestrian, and I ride horses quite frequently, and one of the things that I have to have is a lot of prompting and different skills that I'm practicing. But the piece that we often forget about is that if you're using prompts to teach someone a skill, ultimately you have to wean them off of those prompts. They have to get to a place where they're able to do the skill without someone prompting them, without someone standing there or someone providing verbal instructions for them to get something done. We see this a lot with executive function deficiencies in some of our kiddos, where in order to complete a task or to complete a daily schedule of skills and tasks, they need prompting throughout the day. Well, that's great to a point, but once they hit like junior high or high school, we should be preparing them for the real world of work, college, whatever they're going to be doing after high school, when they're not going to have someone there all the time to tell them exactly what they need to be doing. So natural prompts and cues that we as adults use, such as our phone, our reminder list. I have this amazing app on my iPad that I am learning to love more and more every day. Um, that's a notes app that has list and checklist in it. And those types of things our kids need to be learning to use so that they're no longer dependent on other people to to guide them through what they have to do during the day. Could you change the slide, please? This is what we call a hierarchy of prompting and cueing. It's very important when you're teaching kids using prompting and modeling. It's important to understand how this hierarchy works and how to move within this hierarchy. So if you look at the bottom, the base of this triangle, you're going to see where we have physical prompts, full or partial. So your physical prompts are things like hand over hand, and then you have modeling. And as you move up, the prompts become less invasive until you get up to the very pinnacle of the triangle, which is your natural cues. And so then as you move down, you see you're going least invasive from the top to most at the bottom. This hierarchy of prompting and cueing applies to anything that you're teaching. One of the examples I like to use is baseball. If you think of some of our kids that have played sports, if they're, when they're little, they start out playing t-ball. And a lot of times we use physical prompts with those kiddos. So you're standing behind them, your hands are over their hands, and you're actually helping them to hit the ball so that they get that feel and they know what that feels like. Well, if we never faded that off, then you're going to have all of our Astros standing up at the plate with their coach behind them holding their hands while they hit the ball. That doesn't work. So there's a natural progression of moving from this physical prompts to a natural cue. And the natural cue is that all the hand signals that the coach is giving from the dugout, telling them what kind of hit to make and what kind of ball to look for. So that's kind of a real world example, a pretty obvious example of how that works. But it's the same thing. In school, you can think about handwriting. A lot of times with kindergartners, sometimes we actually have to do hand over hand when they're starting out writing to show them how to hold their pencils and to make sure that their grip is natural and they understand what we're expecting of them. Well, that's great. That's fine if they need that when they get started. But then as they're learning, then we start fading that away. We no longer put our hands on theirs to help them to grip the pencil correctly. Then we just model it for them. We show them what it looks like. And then eventually they've practiced enough that we can just give them a verbal prompt. And you're going to do this with everything that you teach. It doesn't matter where you start. You're going to start with providing enough support so that they can be successful at a task. because you want them to feel the success. But then you're going to start backing away from whatever that level is that you've provided and start moving up the triangle until you get to the point that all they need are those natural cues to be successful.
Brandi, you said something that I want you to touch on, because I know with my own child that I saw this, where an ADHD brain is several years behind their peers, basically from a maturity level. So you may have a fourth grader or a fifth grader that doesn't have the independence that a typical fifth grader would have, and they are needing some more cueing, some more help, and things like that. Can you kind of talk about that? Because I know that I saw that all years of development, that, you know, that we, from an ADHD perspective, we were definitely behind. We got there, but maybe late to the party, you know, like, so thinking, I guess what I am getting at is thinking that your 9-year-old or however old they are should be able to do what your other neurotypical 9-year-old did at that age from an independence level. Can you just talk more about that?
Sure. So I guess thinking around this with the prompting and modeling, you know, first of all, you have to keep in mind that when we're talking about ADHD, um, you know, as a neurodevelopmental disorder, exactly what Allison just said, they may be developmentally behind a little bit, and they will get there. So it's okay to provide the extra support as needed. The trick that I find with those kiddos, especially when they're in a general education classroom, sometimes comes from their them being self-conscious of receiving the types of supports that they might need. So sometimes we have to get creative. Sometimes we need to be particularly sensitive to that and making sure that they are not anyway embarrassed by the types of supports that they're providing. I hope that's kind of where you were getting at with that. But again, you know, it's not that they're not going to get there, and we have to keep that as the end goal. And you know, the more practice that we can provide them, the more trials that they have, and by trial I mean opportunities to try a skill, to do that skill successfully, the more likely they are that to be successful at some point. Which again, this independence being a process, that's where the never being too early to start some of these things, you know, and be sensitive to, just like being sensitive to fading the prompts away, we have to be sensitive to making sure that we're providing enough support that they are being successful. Because one of the things that you don't want to do is to throw them into a task that's not appropriate for them so that they're never successful. And I'm going to touch on that in just a minute with another one of the barriers that actually has a name. And we're going to look at that and what that means. So I hope that answered your question, Allison. We'll keep going. If anybody else has a question about that, feel free to drop that in the chat. I'm happy to answer questions as we go as well. I'm really open to anything that you may want to ask. So learned helplessness is another biggie. This is another barrier that we see frequently. And the learned helplessness factor comes from reinforcement over time, whether it's someone's words or someone's action, that they feel like they're not capable of doing something, which the majority of the time is not true. And it kind of goes hand in hand with the pyramid of prompting and cueing, because if we're providing them too much support, if we're jumping in too early and trying to support them when they really don't need it, what we're essentially telling them is, oh, you can't do this by yourself, so I'm gonna help you. This is an easy one for this is a really easy one for paraprofessionals in school to fall into, because there's a fine line between providing enough support and not providing enough support. And so it's just where making sure when in your IEP meetings, asking the questions about the training that the teachers and the staff in the classroom have. It's okay to bring up these topics and say, you know what, we'd like to make sure that this doesn't happen. What are we doing to ensure that this doesn't happen? So it's one of those things that needs to be addressed, because one of the hardest things to overcome in a program that is teaching young adults work and job skills is overcoming learned helplessness. It's probably the most difficult thing to deal with, is when you have a young adult that comes into a program that feels like they're not capable of doing anything. And basically, you're having to start over and help them to find out and understand that, yeah, you are capable and you do have skills and you can work and you can, if they're going to college, you can go to college. So it's really important for us to be on top of this and make sure that that our kids are not falling into this trap. All right, some of the strategies. What are some of the strategies that that you can use to make sure that these two things don't happen? So we've already talked about fading. So fading prompts is using that that hierarchy of prompting and cueing, and making sure that if you're wherever you are on that hierarchy, that you are working to get to those natural prompts and cues. Waiting. Don't offer the help before it's needed. Let them try something before you actually step in. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. And then make sure that you know what the individual is capable of doing. Don't ask them to be doing something that is so difficult for them, they're never going to be successful. Don't give them something that is so easy that they're never going to have to try. So you have to know where your kid is. You have to know what their capabilities are in order to kind of hit that sweet spot. All right, this is a big one. We see this one a lot. Life doesn't happen by magic. Throughout the last 7 years, especially working with more and more young adults in a transition program, we have seen that so many of these young adults come to us and they have no idea what it even takes to be independent, because of the expectations or lack thereof that their parents have for them at home. Because there's so few, they don't know what their parents and others in their lives are doing for them on a regular basis. We have the picture here of the laundry. So many of our kids, so many of our young adults just think that the laundry just happens. They get up, they come home, and their clothes are in the closet, hung up, and they're clean. Dinner's cooked. The car, you get in it every day and it drives off fine, and they don't know any of those things that happen to make sure that everything functions the way that it should function. Their shampoo and their soap in their bathrooms, they're always there for them. A lot of our young adults and our kids don't know the processes and the procedures behind a lot of those things. And that, I know that sounds maybe kind of crazy that they don't, but so many of our kids have to be instructed with direct instruction. They need you to tell them things specifically so that they understand what is going on behind the scenes. They're not going to just pick up on all of that just by watching what's going on around them. So it's important for you to involve your kiddos, whether those are your kids or your students, in all of the day-to-day running of your household. It's never too early to start giving them chores. We have a question?
Yeah, we had one that says, what if we tell them they can do it and they're stubborn and they refuse to do it? Do you have any suggestions for ones that are kind of giving some pushback?
Yeah. So a lot of times that's going to fall into one of, I think, two things. A lot of times it's insecurity. It may be just them needing that reassurance over and over again. And so in that case, it may be, breaking the task down just enough that they can do a piece of the task that they are comfortable that they're going to be successful with, and then eventually giving them a little bit more, something a little more challenging. But a lot of times, what I find is those kiddos that appear to be stubborn, it's not always being stubborn as much as it is not having the executive function skills to initiate and to plan out and finish a task that's being required of them. So a little bit of investigation on your part, if you're a parent, caregiver, maybe talking to those at school that are working with your child. If you're the educator, doing some assessment with them and figuring out, is it truly, which piece is that? Do they need some executive skills um, to be able to help them to initiate and get those tasks done? And that goes back to the hierarchy of prompting and cueing as well. Looking at what are we asking them to do. If it's them not feeling confident, then we need to not be asking them something that's quite as challenging as what we've asked. So hopefully that helps. Um, where are we? I'm sorry. Would you change that slide? All right. So what are the strategies for life happens by magic? The first one is give them appropriate chores. You can go ahead and change the next slide. If you Google, just a simple Google, there are chore charts everywhere. You can go find one for any age group. I have this one, the largest one here says age 2 to 3. I've seen them as small as like 16 to 18 months, different things that you can ask your kids to do. The point is that you're just asking them to help. You're asking them to do things. I do about 300 intakes a year for our social skills program. And um, sometimes I'm a little bit flabbergasted, but most of our parents don't give the kids chores of any kind. They have no responsibilities at home other than school stuff. Now, granted, I totally understand that so many of our schools, so many of our kids, school is so difficult for them, and it is stressful that it's hard sometimes to give them expectations and have those extra things during the day. But if we don't give them any expectations, they're never going to learn these things that are going on at the house. Um, Go ahead and change that one, please. And then set aside time each week to teach skills. And this is going to look different for every family. It may be when you are driving in the car on the way to an appointment. It may be 30 minutes once a week on a Sunday when you're teaching a skill. Just find time during the week to be teaching something. And again, if you're starting early, you may pick one skill. Let's say you're picking laundry. You may work on that same skill for years, and it's okay because your ultimate goal is to get to that point of fluency. So it's okay if you're working on the same skill over and over again. And then be available to assist as needed. If you're requesting that they participate in family activities and trying to get them to do those skills, keep in mind that support that might be needed. So when you're asking them to do a skill, be there to assist. And going back to the hierarchy, sometimes sometimes the first level for a child that's going to make them feel confident and that's going to get them to do something is body doubling, which is when you're right there beside them and you're both doing the same thing at the same time, so that they don't feel like they're being set aside, and asked to do something just them. They've got that support there. But again, that's okay when you start. Back it off until you get to natural cues. And then talk to your kids about, let me go back. Sorry. Talk to your kids about the things that happen in your household. Talk to them, talk to them about the responsibilities that you have, even if they're not things that you expect them to help with at the time. Tax season's coming up. That's a big one for a lot of our kids. When they first start going to work, they have no idea what all that money is that's being taken out of their check. I've seen so many kids that get a first paycheck and they want to know, who took their money and why and where did it go? And they didn't understand those things. Talk to your kids about all of those things that have to happen. Changing light bulbs in your house, changing the air vents outside, all the things that you have to do outside to keep a household going. The car, filling out your registration every year. In Houston, lots of us have the easy tags on the car that have to be renewed and set up in your bank account so that you can drive on the toll roads in Houston. Well, those are the kinds of things that you need to be talking to them about. And, when you have registrations and things that you're completing, and a lot of times it's easier for us to just do it, but it's so much more beneficial to our kids if while we're doing it, we're explaining to them and saying, hey, mom's got to go take 5 minutes and complete this registration. Why don't you come here for a second? Let me explain to you what this is. And at least they've been exposed to it, and then they know that that's something that has to take place in your household. So earlier we were talking, I mentioned about making sure that you're providing enough support with a task. It's called the Goldilocks principle. It's making sure that the skills that you are giving are not too easy, they're not too hard, they're just right. And again, it goes back to, if it's too easy, then a lot of times they get bored. A lot of times, this is when in schools, when you see behavior start, is when they're not being challenged. And the same thing when things are too hard. If they're being asked to do things that are too hard and they're not being supported, we see behaviors and we see things that come up that don't need to be there. So making sure that we understand the skills are just right for them, and we're there to provide exactly the right amount of support for them to be successful. Everyone needs to feel success. Can you imagine if every task that you were asked to do on your job, you never got it right? Would you want to keep doing that? Of course not. So we need to make sure that the tasks are just right, they can feel success, and then the next time you can ask them to do something that's a little bit harder, provide a little more support, and on until they are doing things independently. Okay, go ahead and one more, please. We touched on this already. Involve them in your household maintenance activities. And then this is something that's come up in the last couple of years that I had never really thought about, but teach all the household skills, even if you have a housekeeper or you have another family member. We have a lot of families that we work with that have multi-generations that are living together. So you may have a grandmother who's home who is cooking and doing some of the housekeeping during the day. And so again, things are happening by magic because your child just comes home and it's all done. So even if those things are happening, you still need to be explaining them to them and still need to make sure that they understand all those things that are being done by everyone in your family as a team, or everyone that's involved in your household as a team. So just something that came up a few years ago, and that we didn't really expect to encounter, but it happens a lot with a lot of our young adults. So just remember that as a barrier.
Brandi, one thing that I know that I did with my kids is like those medical appointments. Of course, this is for kids that are verbal. But those medical appointments, when they're getting in high school, junior high, high school, talking to them about things in the car. So that way, when the doctor comes in, saying, hey, when the doctor comes in, I want you to say hello and why
Right.
you're here, and a little bit about if there's any history that the doctor might need to be aware of. I'll be right here to help if you need me, but you know this is you, and you're going to have to explain these things in the future. So we did that a lot, and that is helpful because your mommy doesn't always go with you on those doctor's appointments in the future.
Right.
And so I think that that's a good one, and it helps build some confidence too. And the medical community, they're always so friendly and happy to hear your kids speak.
Absolutely. And that goes in hand with self-advocacy and self-determination. You know, that's a big thing for our guys, is learning how to advocate for themselves. And as they get older, understanding what their needs are and knowing how to ask for those. In our social skills classes, those are classes that we teach specifically, you know, understanding what kind of support do you need? Some of our kids are going to need different types of accommodations and support possibly throughout their lives, and they need to be able to ask for those things comfortably and to be able to explain those things. And so Allison's exactly right. Starting in a friendly environment like that and being able to talk to a doctor or a therapist and explain their needs is a huge step towards self-advocacy. All right, masking is another challenge that we found very commonly. Masking is sometimes called camouflaging, and it's doing things to hide traits to better fit in a situation. And it's a lot more common than what you think. You and I use masking all the time in situations. Depending on where we are and what the situation is, we mask to help ourselves to fit in better. Places that we may not be comfortable, we may mask. Um, a lot of our kids that are in general education classrooms that are participating with their peers are doing a lot of masking. They become experts at it, so much so that other people around them may not know when they truly um, need support because they're so good at telling us that they don't. It's one of the reasons, it's believed to be one of the reasons that um, so many girls are misdiagnosed and not diagnosed with autism until they're much, much older. Um, because they're better at masking and appearing not to have the same traits that others do. One thing that many of our kids will do, that's part of masking, is telling you that everything is fine or good when it's really not. Um, Go ahead and change slides, please. Often they would rather tell you that everything is okay and they understand what's expected of them than to admit that they are confused or don't understand. It becomes a social survival strategy. So it may look like forcing eye contact during conversations. It may look like imitating smiles and facial features or hiding or minimizing their personal interest. It may be developing a repertoire of rehearsed responses to questions, pushing through sensory discomfort when they don't want to, or even disguising certain stimming behaviors. Masking becomes really detrimental in the vocational world. When an employer gives you a task and asks if you've, quote, got it, and you just reply, yeah, sure, I've got it, but you really don't understand what it is that's being asked of you, it becomes a real problem. We see this a lot. You ask a kiddo, do you understand the assignment that we just gave you? Yep, I'm good. But then when they get ready to start the assignment, they really did not catch what any of the directions meant and they're confused. And instead of asking for help, they're just going to sit there and they're not going to let someone know that they really don't understand what that assignment was. Um, it's important for our kids to be able to talk about their emotions. It's important for our kids to understand that asking for help is not a negative thing, that asking for help is a sign of confidence and knowing that everyone needs help sometimes, and it's okay if we know who to go to and how to ask. Again, this is another social skill lesson that we teach to all of our high schoolers and all of our teens. So what are some of the strategies that you can do to help them? So when you give your child directions, have them repeat them back to you. Typically, if someone has listened and understood and can repeat back to you what was said, then they really did get it. And they really do understand what's being expected of them. Teach your child how to ask for understanding. If you don't understand someone, then you have to know how to ask the right questions. And a lot of times that takes practice. It's not something that you're going to be able to just explain to a child or a student once and then they're going to know how to do that. It's something that has to be practiced. It's a skill that's learned. A lot of times it's giving them different scenarios and role playing, what to ask and when to ask it, those types of things. The same thing with teaching your child how to ask for help. There's a process to that as well that sometimes we have to break down to teach them. Number one, you have to understand who are you going to go to for help? Who's the right person to ask in different situations? And then what is the correct protocol for asking the questions? Even just waiting to ask for help sometimes. I've seen a lot with some of our younger kids, they figure out they can ask for help, but then it's on their terms immediately and they can't wait. When they need help, they need it right then. And they haven't figured out that process of maybe the teacher's helping someone else. I have to wait my turn. There's lots of steps in those things. And it's a, again, it's a process of teaching those things. And the sooner you start working on it, the more trials that they get to practice and the better they're going to get. Teaching your child to feel comfortable asking for help. We have a lot of our kids that I work with, they're perfectionists. They don't want to mess up. They don't want people to perceive them as having made a mistake. And so asking for help to them is a failure on their part. And so there's a lot of conversation. There's a lot of talking around the fact that everybody needs help and that there's nothing to feel shamed about in that, and we have to learn to feel comfortable in that situation. Teach your child to express and talk about their emotions. Again, this is another one of those things that it's going to take lots and lots of practice. You have to learn to teach them to read faces. You have to teach them the vocabulary around emotions. A lot of our kids at school learn about happy, sad, angry, surprised, but they don't learn all the connotations of that. They don't learn that happy is also peaceful and content and joyful and over the moon excited, all those different types of words and the different scenarios that they go with. And so teaching emotions is a huge process that should happen all the time. There should be lots of conversations going on about that. And then teaching your child perspective taking and theory of mind, learning to understand what other people are thinking and feeling in different situations, and that it's not always the same as you. So all of those pieces help with this masking and help the kids to feel more comfortable and more self-confident in themselves so that they don't have to camouflage and pretend to be someone else in a social situation. Um, having a false sense of reality. Having a false sense of reality is one of those things that we see happening in the schools, especially. So the students are praised for trying their best. It doesn't matter what they do. If they try, then they're praised for that. I am not against um, positive reinforcement. I'm a behavior analyst. I believe strongly in positive reinforcement, but I also believe that it's super important for us to teach our kids um, the reality of things. And this becomes especially important again at that age of transitioning out of high school into the real world, work, and college environments. If you and I are at work and our boss gives us a task and we try, but it's not correct, we're not going to get praised for that. We're not going to get paid for that either. And that becomes a super harsh reality for young adults, especially when they've gone through their whole school career and they just have to try and everything's fine. Yes.
And I think of this like in the T-ball area, like in the early sports, everybody wins mantra and everybody gets a trophy and things like that. And some of that has a domino effect in those later years. We did have somebody in the chat box that says, what is theory of mind? Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, sure. So theory of mind is that theory of mind is understanding what other people are thinking and feeling, and understanding that that is not always the same thing as what you are thinking and feeling. I do a whole presentation on theory of mind, and one of the examples I give is if you and I are walking down the sidewalk and we pass a yard and there's a super, super cute puppy in that yard, and I am thinking, oh, that puppy is so adorable. I would love to take him home. And whoever I'm with is looking at the puppy and thinking, oh my gosh, I'm so glad that person has that puppy because puppies are so hard and so much work. So you're seeing the same thing, but you're having different thoughts about that. And it comes into play when you're working on perspective in situations. So for a child to understand other perspectives in a situation, they have to first understand that not everyone thinks and feels the same thing that they do in all situations. All right, so strategies, battling the barrier of having a false sense of reality. Number one, let them fail. It's okay for our kids to not always be successful. Now, granted, what we were talking about earlier with the Goldilocks principle, you do want to be providing them tasks that they're going to be successful at. But if they fail every once in a while, that's okay if you're right there assisting them and you step in and you help them and provide them support. Um, so don't always let it be perfect. Don't always let it be something that they can't that they're not gonna that they're going to do on their own the first time. And then don't fix everything for them. And we're really going to talk about this in just a second, but so many of our students are used to us stepping in and fixing every situation for them, every problem. We step in and we fix it so they never have to do that. And then this is a big one that I find that sometimes parents don't understand completely, but it's talking about and teaching natural consequences. Um, there's a big difference between just providing a consequence in a situation and teaching the natural consequences. Sometimes teaching natural consequences takes a little more work. We have to really think about the situation and what would have happened to them in a situation, and how can we replicate that as a consequence so that it carries forward later. So something as a parent, especially something worth looking into and reading more about to make sure that the things that you're teaching at home are going to follow them as they grow older as well. And then the last barrier And this may very well be not the most important topic we're talking about tonight, but maybe the hardest of all to overcome. If there is a barrier that I would encourage you to start working on immediately, regardless of what age your student is, it's this one. It's the lack of problem solving skills. And I have a lot of friends in education, and this is not just for our guys with ADHD. This is not for my autistic friends. This is really for all kids. We I think we're seeing this generationally across kids in general. They're lacking problem solving skills. When they don't know what to do, most of the time the answer for them is to do nothing. And you know as well as I do, that becomes a huge problem, especially when you end up in an employment situation or you end up in college. Doing nothing is never the answer. You have to do something to fix the situation. But so many of them don't know how to even determine what to do next. This next slide is a worksheet. Actually, is that go one more? Or did we skip one? There it is. Sorry. Okay, so this is a worksheet that we use in a lot of our social skills and young adult classes. It's a problem-solving flowchart. It looks really complicated, but it's really not if you break it down and teach piece by piece. And again, remember, this is something that's not going to be taught in a day. It's not going to be taught in a week or a month. This is something that you're going to be practicing and working on for years. So the first thing is to identify what the problem is. And that's big for a lot of our kids. You have to identify and isolate the problem. And then you need to talk about, can I solve it by myself? Or am I going to need help to solve the problem? And once you've decided that, you're going to jump over to either the green or you're going to jump over to the yellow. So let's say you decide that you can solve the problem by yourself. Then you're going to come up with 3 possible solutions. How can you try it? Could you solve it? And then you're going to try the solutions. Did number 1 work? Okay, you're good. You're done. If it didn't, go on to number 2. If that worked, okay, great. You're good. If it didn't, go on to number 3. Try number 3. If that worked, good. If it didn't, you're going to jump up to the yellow side. I need help to solve this problem. Well, we talked about a little while ago. Asking for help is huge for our kids. So the next step in here is deciding, who am I going to ask? So we have to decide who can help us with this problem. And then, are they available now to ask? So if they are, okay, go ask them politely. If they're not, maybe you need to leave a message, or maybe you need to sit in your seat and raise your hand until they can come help you. And then it keeps going. Yes, they can help solve the problem. No, they can't. Great. Or what additional help do I need? So it really just breaks everything down. Again, a lot of our kids learn through direct instruction. So we have to teach the pieces before they can put it all together. And practice, practice, practice in all different types of situations and scenarios.
This is a great slide, and we definitely have good feedback in the chat about the slide as well. And just as a reminder, everybody actually is going to get a copy of the slides and Brandi's contact information too for any of our educators that are on tonight that may want to have this in the PDF. You can email Brandi directly, and she might be able to send that to you as well. Thank you for sharing this. This is helpful. And this is kind of the visual thing of like kind of breaking it all down for sure. I know that we're close to the end of our time, but before we go, I want to make sure that, Brandi, that they have your contact information and how to reach out to you. Are you accepting new clients? Is there an age range of clients that you are accepting? And do you accept insurance? Sorry, I know that was a mouthful, but those are all the things that come
You're
to mind.
Fine. So I have a new company called Spectrum Links. spectrumlinks.com. You can find online. Everything that we do is virtual. Spectrum Links is created to create a community for parents and families. We actually have within our website, it works like Facebook, and you can go in and join with experts in there to answer questions for you. You can post and chat with each other and network and do those kinds of things. We offer virtual transition classes for teens and young adults as well. So right now, we don't have a contract with Texas Workforce, but we're working on that. So as of right now, everything is self-pay. We're trying to make it super affordable for people. So you can check out all those classes online. We also offer coaching. So educators, parents, if you have questions, if you want to learn more about anything that I've mentioned, you can set up coaching sessions with me. So lots of different things, really just wanting to be a support to the community, especially those that are in other cities and rural areas that don't have some of the resources that we have in some of the larger metropolitan areas.
And do you offer like a free first consultation or an introductory, like, a few minutes with you to understand why they might be coming to you to see if it might be a good fit? Okay.
We do. You can find all of that. We do a free initial consult if you want to set up coaching, where we'll talk about kind of what your goals are and if I feel like I can help you. Our new community is really a kind of an answer to that as well. It's subscription based, so $9.99 a month. You join, and like I said, you can come in there. You can post your questions there. You can even, if you have an IEP meeting come up, you can post a picture of one of your IEP pages and ask questions in there. And anything that we can answer like that, we will. If we meet somebody that we feel like you need a little bit more in depth, we're going to tell you, that's not a topic that we can address just right here in a public chat. But really trying to create a really safe space for families to network and get the information and the help that they need in a very easy way. So feel free to email me, ask me any questions, check out the website, and I'm happy to talk to anybody.
I love it. This has been a great presentation. And I thank you for being here with us tonight, even when you didn't feel good. So thank you again for that.
You're welcome.
So just a quick reminder for anybody that may have joined late. We've got the ADDA SR has a virtual speaker this weekend on the 3rd from 9 to 11. I put a link in the chat box. And this is Ari Techman, and it is balanced, happy relationships with ADHD. So I know that that's an important topic for people. So you'll want to register for that. And then also, like I said, everybody's going to get a link to the slides, a link to the recording, and then also an opportunity to join ADDASR. Again, I think it's like $40 a year. So you'll want to check that out. There's a lot of conferences and a lot of great information out there. And there are groups all over the state, not just where we are. We're virtual now, so we did have a lot of people from all over the state attending tonight. So I appreciate that. Thanks so much, everybody. It's certainly been my pleasure. I hope everybody has a great weekend. And Brandi, we hope you feel better. Talk to you soon.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Thank
Bye
you.
now.
Bye.